"Who's that now?" came a not-so-welcoming voice from behind the door. "Verka, it's me, Tamura. Have you been outside lately?" "What for?" "Well, I saw some clouds on the horizon. Might be a storm brewing. Maybe warn Scotch, just in case." "Clouds?" Verka sounded surprised. "Huh. It was clear at noon. Forecast looked calm too." "I'm not making it up," Tamura snorted. "Anyway, if you step outside, take a look. If that storm catches the group out in the deadwood somewhere, they'll be lucky if we ever find their bones." "I'll check," Verka promised, followed by the splash and gurgle of water. Feeling he'd done his duty, Tamura headed off. The clouds on the horizon seemed darker now, but he didn't think much of it. For the next half hour, the launchpad crew leisurely sipped beer, played cards, passed, and sipped again. Then they stepped out onto the porch for some fresh air. Tamura, out of habit, glanced skyward and froze. "Kusu Sharmata." He gasped. His friends and co-workers, Georges Soriel and Davis McGregory, turned their heads in unison. Soriel dropped his beer can in shock. About 10% of the sky was now swallowed by an immense atmospheric front. The clouds at the edges were lighter, almost silver, but deeper in the heart of the mass lurked something vast and black. Lightning should have been dancing in there. It was the perfect storm cloud, but not a single flash lit up the darkness beneath the swirling gray and white fringes. And there was no thunder. The front moved in total silence, like a ghost. It was approaching fast, far too fast, and anyone could now see it with the naked eye. "Verkoe!" Tamura shouted, vaulting over the railing. Soriel and McGregory dropped their beers and sprinted toward the flyer. They hadn't even bothered to close the windows in the control room before leaving their shift. If the storm hit, who knew what damage it could do? "Verkoe!" Tamura bolted up the steps, stormed into the cottage, crossed the hallway, and banged on the bathroom door. "Get out. It's starting. What the hell are you yelling for, you slant-eyed moron?" Verka hissed, emerging from the ionizer and hurriedly pulling her robe shut. Tamura silently pointed toward the front door. At that moment, the suggestive glimpse under her robe couldn't have interested him less. Verka shook her head skeptically and stepped outside. "Oh my God!" she breathed at the threshold. Then, ignoring the flapping robe and decency alike, she turned and ran to the terminal. The robe billowed scandalously behind her, but she didn't care. Tamura didn't care either. It wasn't like he hadn't seen naked women before. His eyes were fixed on the sky. For 10 whole minutes, Verka tried to contact Scotch. Nothing. No response from the rescue teams either. The comms were dead silent, just static and a strange crackling that refused to be suppressed by the carrier frequency. Muttering darkly, hissing like an angry wyvern, she abandoned her attempts and dashed to the bedroom to get dressed. Meanwhile, Tamura joined his comrades in the flyer. It was only a couple of local minutes to the spaceport buildings. Soriel took the controls. McGregory glared at the monstrous front through the windshield. "That's not a storm," McGregory said calmly as they approached. "Look at the gaps on the sides. It looks like something big is moving over the port. And I don't think it's weather-related at all." Despite their experience, none of the dispatchers had ever seen a large atmospheric ship land or fly over. But they knew how to put 2 and 2 together. "Son of a ships. That's what the physicist from the university station was talking about," Tamura exclaimed. Soriel didn't get it. "Explain." "Some nut called an hour ago. A physicist. Said comms were down, and there were a ton of military ships over Tabasco. I figured he was drunk or sleep-deprived. But turns out, yeah, that does look more like a ship than a storm," McGregory admitted. "A damn big one, too. Never seen anything like it." The flyer tilted and dived toward the ground, skimming over the lush vegetation before coming to a halt near the control room. All 3 jumped out and ran inside. Leaving the cockpit open, Soriel immediately shut the windows. McGregory took his seat at the main console. Tamura headed to the comms terminal. It was useless. Like Verka, he couldn't get through to anyone. Not even the jumpy physicist from the university station. The fishermen were silent. The ranchers were silent. The other spaceport dispatchers were silent. The main firm's communication hub. Dead. Tamura couldn't even raise Verka. Maybe she'd gone to hide with one of the other girls that McGregory skimmed through the incoming tick log. Not a single entry. Whoever or whatever was coming in hadn't bothered to identify itself. And the equipment was acting weird, like it was running on dying batteries. Then everything just went dark. God damn it. Tamura cursed. My terminal just died. Mine too. McGregory said evenly at that moment. The first assault ship roared overhead. The swirling front reached the spaceport, and now, through the rifts. In the clouds, they could see the belly of a massive, pancake-shaped vessel, most likely a warship. What in hell is going on? Soriel muttered, his eyes locked on the window. No one answered him. At that moment, the front edge of an atmospheric wave reached the cosmodrome. A dense, tight wall of air, pushed ahead by an enormous ship. The grass rippled, the jungle fringe rustled, the tops of cedar maples, onyxes, and padmodendrons swayed and bent. The wind slammed into the control tower. Thankfully, Soriel had managed to shut all the windows in time. Otherwise, they might have been shattered against the walls or ripped clean off their hinges. The transparent window plastic creaked and flexed. The flyer's canopy slammed shut under the chaotic gust, and the craft itself was shoved off the bare landing pad in front of the control tower, tipped over on its side, and then flipped several times across its roof. Then the first gust passed. A short lull followed. By the way the grass still shivered, they could tell the second wave was on its way toward the tower. Meanwhile, the ship had already covered the tourist base and the surrounding area. Through the swirling, agitated air, they could now glimpse the monstrous contrail trailing behind its stern. Tamura, Soriel, and McGregory barely had time to recover from their initial shock when the ship released several shuttles from its underside. Dropships, as they would soon find out. They hovered above the cosmodrome field, pressing pale white gravity lift columns into the soil, within which shapes began flickering up and down, darting and shifting. Then the lifts deactivated and the shuttles lifted off, leaving behind clusters of alien infantry on the ground. One larger shuttle dropped 4 walking tanks before following the others toward what used to be the Zenith Array, now replaced by gaping black cargo holds of the planetary cruiser. Landing troops, McGregory said, pale. Aliens. It's an invasion. Invasion? Tamura asked, bewildered. On Tabasca? What's even worth taking here? Vera the dispatcher? Or that Kashkun and her litter by the gazebo? You got a better word for what's happening? McGregory snapped. No, darling, let's call things what they are. This is an invasion, which means there's something here on Tabasca worth enough for them to attack. Not just anywhere, but a planet under Earth's dominion. And the fact that we have no idea what it is only makes it worse. Tamura cracked his knuckles in frustration, but stayed silent. He had no counter-argument. Who are they? I can't quite see. Soriel asked plaintively a minute later. Tamura clenched his jaw tight, staring out the window without blinking. Looks like Shat Suri to me, McGregory said, squinting. Skeletal types. Higher race from the second wave. That means it's a serious invasion, not a hit and run, by some upstart neo-sapiens. And we don't even have weapons. McGregory sighed heavily. There are weapons in the storage locker, Tamura recalled. Plasma hunting rifles. But the quartermaster left on patrol, and I don't think the service girls know the access codes. Have you all gone insane? Soriel cried. Rifles? There's only 3 of us. Against a cruiser. That's suicide. And what's your idea? Tamura asked darkly. Wait to die? Step outside and bare our necks, so the skeletons don't have to work too hard slicing them. Cool it, Tamura, said the ever-reasonable Davis McGregory. He has a point. The 3 of us can't win a battle, and we'd have to get to the weapons first. So what's your alternative? Hide. For now. Where? The lab. If they don't scan for biomass with full-spectrum sensors, we might get lucky. Then let's go. Soriel jumped up instantly. What are we waiting for? 2 of the walking tanks were heading straight across the field toward the lone tower of the control center. The other two, awkwardly squatting and bouncing, made their way toward the Cosmodrome's main building and cargo terminals. The alien infantry split up. Some climbed onto the tank's armor for an easier ride. Others jogged alongside. "Let's move," Mac Gregory said, pulling himself away from the window and following the others to the stairs. They didn't stop at the first floor, but continued downward. Stretched concrete stairwells led them below ground level. The basement rooms were buried some 30 UNS, roughly 15 meters, deep. The height of a standard 5-story building. BY regulation. Every cosmodrome had to be equipped with a lab for correcting and verifying astronavigation calculations, even a tiny one like the tourist bases on Tabasco. At any time, a passing ship could request help with computational resources due to a malfunction or some other unforeseen complication, and the control crew was obligated to assist however they could. But planet-side conditions made precision tricky. Gravity, humidity, and atmospheric pressure all interfered. That's why each cosmodrome included an autonomous subterranean lab, a kind of giant safe. Inside, conditions were simulated to approximate the near vacuum of space. This was where the most precise calculations were done, and it was exactly where the startled crew now ran for shelter. As far as Mac Gregory remembered, the safe doors had remained open since last year. That meant there was air inside. Even with the control tower's power cut, the lab's entrance had a semi-mechanical lock. It could be sealed manually in an emergency, which is exactly what they did. The heavy door swung shut with a deep clang. The locks clicked into place, and the hermetic seal hissed softly. Tamura fumbled with a piezo lighter, but it gave nothing but sparks. Mac Gregory found a box of old-fashioned matches. They lit without trouble. "Tech blockade. Damn it," Tamura muttered. "Even the lighter's out." "What about their tanks?" Soriel asked. "None of this makes sense." "Shielding." Mac Gregory shrugged. "If you know the jamming frequencies, it's easy enough to block them out. I'd bet anything the skeleton's weapons work just fine. Though I have read somewhere that not all equipment can be shielded." "Will the bioscanners pick us up in here?" Soriel asked grimly. Tamura fumbled in the near darkness, lit only by the faint flicker of a match, until he found the duty box and pulled out a candle. It might have seemed ridiculous, but sometimes the dispatchers of ground-based autolabs had to do astrogational calculations by candlelight to minimize interference and errors. "Bioscanners," muttered Mac Gregory, who remained the calmest and most composed among them. "I wish I knew. In theory, the lab's shielding neutralizes nearly all radiation, except for neutrinos and tasians, of course, which means the bioscanner beam should scatter, but only up to a point. If they've got high-powered emitters, they'll find us. If they're using handhelds, maybe not." "Charming little game," Tamura muttered and shivered. "Ever heard of Flush the Rat?" "No," Soriel replied, hunching his shoulders against the chill. "If a rat hides in its burrow," Tamura explained patiently, "you flush it out. Pour water down the hole, bucket after bucket. We used to do that for fun as kids." "What if the hole has an outlet?" Mac Gregory asked. "All holes have an outlet. Most of them, anyway. But that's the whole point, to pour in more water than the drain can handle. Then the rat has no choice but to come out. And that's when you kill it. Why call it flush if you use water and not smoke?" "Sometimes we do use smoke. Doesn't change the game." "Sounds like a cheery childhood," Mac Gregory grunted. "Children's games are always cruel," Tamura said indifferently. "Then again, adult games aren't much different, Dave. This invasion seems proof enough. My first bucket, a regular tin one, I saw only in the academy. When I was on duty," Mac Gregory added, seemingly at random. Then he fell silent, lost in thought. N01 replied. Soriel began rummaging through the duty box again for no apparent reason. He pulled out more candles, matches, a pack of tea, a glass, and a few basic instruments. "Oh," he said with a spark of interest, pointing to one of them. "A stitcher." The stitcher looked a bit like a gun. It worked by firing a dispersed plasma laser beam that temporarily dissolved intermolecular bonds in virtually any substance. Expose two items, press them together, and once the beam was turned off, their bonds would reform, fusing the objects as one. No glue needed. In a way, it could even be considered a close-range weapon. Tech blockade. Mac Gregory reminded them, raising an eyebrow. They can't keep it up forever. Tamura replied reasonably and snatched the stitcher from Soriel. Any knives? In there? Mac Gregory asked, ever the practical one. No knives. Just a screwdriver and a pair of probes. Piercing, then, Mac Gregory concluded. Lousy. The Shatzers have thick exoskeletons. Not that a knife would help much either. From outside, not a sound could be heard. And so, the dispatchers never knew that at that very moment, for Shatzers had approached the lab's airlock. They searched the surrounding rooms, examined the sealed manual lock, tugged at the door, scanned the area with handheld bioanalyzers, exchanged a few melodious words, and moved on. Climbing the stairs to clear the resort facility above, the three dispatchers stayed holed up in the lab until deep into the night. Eventually, they decided it was time to make a move. By then, all the female staff from the resort had been captured by the Shatzer landing squads. Their forces had taken over the cottages without haste. The Pale Skeletons' ground unit set up camp, and in the main admin building, a command post was being established. Tank units and hover vehicles were already parked on the training grounds, now expanded with turret cutters. Two light cruisers and a support ship had landed at the spaceport. The interrogation of Verka, nominally in charge of the resort, yielded nothing. Unlike the others, she showed no fear or confusion. She answered all the assault officers' questions with just 2 sentences. Our people are in the forest on the route, and when they get back, they'll rip your filthy heads off. Thus, Shada. Urvu received the following intelligence. The southern spaceport near the tourist facility had yielded 8 prisoners, all females. The rest of the Homo were in the forest, armed, and would resist capture. The invasion commander found this satisfactory. He gave the order to locate the remaining armed targets and, naturally, crush any resistance. Then report back. At that time. A special unit of the Pale Skeletons was already making its way through the jungle, headed toward the downed reconnaissance raider. It had splashed down in a shallow river not far from the resort and seemed stuck. Shada Urvu had decided it would be wise to tow it to the spaceport for a proper inspection. The takeover of other designated points on Tabasco went without a hitch. Not a single issue. Soon, the only humans still at large on the planet were the raider crew, the small group from the resort, and one lone fisherman on a nearby islet, who, according to his female companion, had gone off the day before to hunt decapods. All in all, the Ennui directive was being executed successfully, a fact the commander promptly reported. Ennui was pleased. Scotch had started noticing oddities about 3 days ago. For a full week, maybe even more, everything had gone splendidly. The tourists were settling into the jungle and gradually learning to overcome the early, still manageable challenges. On the very first day, Hidden tracked down a huge scarf beetle, properly dosed it with tranquilizer, and at just the right moment, dropped it from a tree onto Ganilla Bot's head. The shrieking could have startled half of Tabasco. But Ganilla's husband didn't panic for a second. Without hesitation, he grabbed the beetle by the wing, yanked it onto the trail, and pinned it to the ground with his machete. In reality, scarf beetles fed exclusively on flower pollen and posed absolutely no threat to humans. But Scotch fully understood the kind of feelings a newcomer might experience in this wild, green world, when something large and nearly invisible against the foliage suddenly crashes down from the dense palms overhanging the trail and lets out a moan that sounds downright unearthly. The eeriness had a simple explanation. Scarf beetles communicated in the low-frequency range, including infrasound. All in all, a pale tenor had barely let go of the machete before seizing his rifle, but Scotch deemed shooting excessive, quickly restored order, and calmed everyone down. That evening, The beetle was roasted on skewers and eaten. Later, Solianka reported that a herd of titanodonts was likely to pass near their intermediate camp, creatures no more dangerous than the scarf beetle, but visually stunning to the point of awe, especially on first encounter. A typical titanodontn was 2.5 times the size of the nearly extinct African elephant and about 1.5 times larger than the Silentian leaf eater. Scotch deliberately extended their day's rest and posted Fausto Arcudi as a lookout on the expected approach path, while moving Podolian far to the other side, just in case. The sight of the Titanodontn herd moving through the jungle practically broke poor Fausto. But Scotch was pleased with the guy. At least he didn't come tearing back to camp screaming. He ran back silently and immediately began whispering frantically into Scotch's ear about monsters about to trample the camp. Scotch told everyone to load their rifles, but under no circumstances to fire, and led the group out to watch. The Titanodontns marched past for at least 20 minutes, massive, muscular brown bodies on column-like legs. Their semi-vertical torsos and humped heads were each the size of a human. Scotch had never seen more majestic creatures. The tourists were equally impressed, talking about it all evening and into the next morning. Podolian had the misfortune of plunging into the river during a crossing. The hardest part had been preventing him from falling in before he stepped onto the deliberately loosened section of the hanging bridge over the Saira. His 20-meter flight was observed with breathless anticipation, and then came the lengthy effort of fishing their designated clown out of the water. Poor Akop had drifted some 40 meters downstream and managed to get his backpack snagged on an ill-placed root, anchoring himself completely, so awkwardly that he couldn't do anything with his hands. Naturally, he dropped the compensator remote, and the spare was in the pack. So he had to sit there stuck in the rapids, choking on spray and kicking away persistent fish heading upriver to spawn, so distracted they'd lost all caution. Of course, they rescued Podolian and made sure the incident provided dinner. The fish soup was phenomenal. The next day, they veered north, following the Saira. Just before dinner, completely by accident, Vorontsov, who had stepped away for a quick bathroom break, stumbled upon a dracket. Luckily, it was a young one and, already full, Vorontsov had, in fact, walked right into the sight of its recent meal. But even a young dracket is still a dracket, and at the sight of a human, the beast charged. Had Vorontsov not hit it square in the head with his first impulse blast, Scotch might have had his first serious incident involving a fatality. But Vorontsov did hit, and the dracket collapsed onto him, already dead. Its claws tore shallowly into his side, and its teeth grazed his face. Vorontsov's wounds kept the group busy until sunset. Scotch couldn't even find time to call in the rescue team for a proper dressing down. Missing a dracket so close to the route was a serious oversight. He seethed inwardly, barely containing his fury. Soon after, Vorontsov was given a session of explosive regeneration, which left him limp and soaked like a drowned rat in the tent, and thankfully, no longer causing problems. Scotch forbade anyone from leaving camp. Even bathroom trips were only allowed in groups and with weapons. And of course, that was the night Solianka, unaware of the dracket incident, left Zban and hidden at the overnight post, turned off his radio, and headed back to camp. Why? That's a story all its own. The tag-along, Mr. Little, hadn't been assigned any duties on the route, for obvious reasons. Scotch and Valty had their hands full managing the tourists, so nobody paid much attention to Little. Turns out, each evening he'd sneak a flask of liquor from his stash and slip away to the hidden rescuers. After a few drinks and a pleasant chat, Little would return to camp and fall blissfully asleep in his private single-person tent, brought from his personal gear stock, since the tour base didn't issue tents like that the day before. While everyone was fussing over the fish soup, Patrice Doule had tossed 2 whole packets of Caledonian pepper into the communal pot. Scotch suspected each of those packets was worth more than all the expedition's gear combined, at least 50 times over. The stuff was rarely exported from New Caledonia and was produced in minuscule quantities. Patrice's gesture was deeply appreciated. Somehow, that scoundrel Little had managed to learn that those 2 packets weren't the end of Patrice's supply. And that evening, he blabbed to Solyanka, the expedition's unofficial chef. And, of course, in his boozy haze, Solyanka couldn't resist such temptation. Especially since, just recently, while scouting the area, he'd found a nest of flightless birds called durans, famous for their thieving nature and astonishing cleverness. Perfect scapegoats for any missing items. Even Scotch wouldn't have been able to dispute that S.O. Solyanka, just to be safe, captured 2 durans, confirmed with Little which tint Patrice and Valentino were sharing, and set off to commit the crime. A real petty crook. To be fair, Scotch couldn't help admiring Solyanka's ingenuity. By Scotch's orders, everyone left their backpacks outside, in the vestibule of the tent module. A minimal barrier, but better than nothing if some curious critter wandered in. So Solyanka wasn't risking much. He patiently waited until everyone had gone to sleep, until Scotch had stepped away to radio the rest of the rescue team, then calmly bypassed the security perimeter, slipped into the target tent, and began rummaging through Patrice's pack without a hint of shame. Unfortunately for him, the girl had either exceptional hearing or a sixth sense. She decided to check out the noise in the vestibule. Solyanka had to make a hasty retreat, releasing the durans and bolting for the bushes. Patrice and Valentina both screamed, reacting quite naturally to the birds. Scotch dropped the radio and sprinted back to camp, right through the very bushes Solyanka had chosen for hiding. The last thing Solyanka wanted was to get caught by the boss. He dove blindly for cover and landed in a puddle teeming with lake crabs, which he paid for instantly. 6 or maybe even 7 of them bit him all at once. Just one bite was agony. 6 or 7 was unspeakable. That was the final straw. Solyanka forgot all about protocol and the sacred secrecy of the rescue team and leapt from the puddle, unluckily, straight into Scotch's welcoming arms. Valti showed up moments later. In short, calming the tourists down turned into a long and painful process. After that, Solyanka got thoroughly chewed out by Scotch, both right then and again later in the other bushes. He had to limp away towards Ban and hidden, thoroughly disgraced, with a formal reprimand hanging over him like a cloud. But the most absurd part of this ridiculous story came to light only the next morning. The dimwit birds, despite being dimwits, somehow managed, in all the commotion, to swipe Patrice's notebook and Valentina's compact mirror. In any other situation, the entire exotic tour crew would have laughed themselves half to death over the whole affair. But neither Scotch nor Solyanka felt like laughing that time. Patrice's notebook was eventually recovered, found in a nest, of all places, when Scotch led the group there the following morning. That included Vorontsov, already back on his feet. The mirror, however, was lost forever. By morning, Solyanka had sobered up and was horrified by what he'd done. He had never stolen anything in his life, and even now, looking back, it hadn't exactly been theft. Not if you really strained your memory and reconstructed yesterday's events. He had wanted to cook something special, really special, and of course, share it with everyone, including the owner of the magical seasoning. And it wasn't even about fame. Solyanka knew that Scotch would never break his rescue worker anonymity, that a normal cook might get a once-in-a-lifetime chance to prepare a signature dish seasoned with genuine Caledonian pepper. But all those antics, if you stripped away the drama, were still part of their usual field routine. Sure, with a few over-the-top moments. The Dracath, Solyanka's outrageous behavior, but still, routine. Then things suddenly began accelerating. First slowly, then faster and faster, spiraling into a string of abnormal events and utterly unplanned incidents. The first real red flag, in hindsight, was the empty supply depot near Mangrove Bay. Animals had looted depots before, that wasn't new. But this time, it was clear. The perpetrator had intelligence. Scotch led the group to the depot with uncanny precision, despite it lying nearly a kilometer and a half off the trail. But the detour to Mangrove Bay had always been part of the itinerary, a highlight for the tourists. Trees on legs, an entire grove of them, and a mind-blowing array of wildlife. The lake crabs alone were worth the trip. Walking pliers, damn them. There wasn't even a question of going barefoot among the mangroves. Even rubber boots might not save you. The crabs weren't poisonous, no, but their claws could exert absurd, bone-crushing pressure per square centimeter. Delicious, though, the little monsters. In soups, boiled, dried, finger-licking good. Naturally, Scotch had ordered Solyanka to go hunt for crabs. So Solyanka spent the morning splashing around in the bay, out of the tourist's sight, while Scotch grabbed Zuberbuller and Simonov, took a couple of empty packs, and headed to the supply depot. The depot sat halfway up a gentle hill covered with young palmodendrons, with its entrance facing away from the bay. A small, toy-like plastic porch. A locked door that looked like it belonged on a dollhouse. An electronic lock. The lock hadn't been picked, it had been cut. Whether with a specialized tool, an improvised torch, or some kind of electro-impulse device, it didn't matter. Scotch froze on the spot when he saw it. Then he stepped forward abruptly, knelt down, and pulled the door open. Inside, nothing. Nothing at all. The NO tourist group had ever emptied a depot more than halfway. It was an old and sensible rule. Who knew what might happen? Knowing there were backup supplies along the trail made it easier for any guide to breathe. Wow, Zuberbuller muttered, perplexed. Cleaned out. He and Simonov had been to several depots with Scotch before. Once, they'd even had a minor adventure. One lock refused to open, and they'd had to hack the security system using Patrice's fancy notebook, which they'd luckily recovered later from the bird's nest. They'd dismantled the system, piece by piece, looted the food with great enthusiasm, and Scotch had locked the place back up as if nothing had happened. No need to burden the tourists with those details. Well, Scotch never wasted time lamenting. With our current emergency stock, we've got enough food for about 3 days. That's assuming we hunt and don't ration too hard. So starvation's off the table for now. But we'll still need to hunt. How far to the next depot? Simonov asked, his tone flat and emotionless. Couple days trek. I'd planned to stay here today, to show everyone the bay. And, well, maybe someone can hop over in a flyer, Simonov suggested. Better yet, have the resort deliver more supplies. The resort hadn't responded that morning, but Scotch wasn't about to bring that up. After all, he'd tried contacting them outside of scheduled check-ins, and Verka wasn't exactly known for sticking close to her admin cottage. More likely, she was soaking in the tub, as usual. That routine had even earned a nickname among the staff. Where's Verka? Oh, off growing gills again. So Scotch wasn't too worried. Verka had a history of missing calls. Yesterday, the day before that. What did bother him was Simonov's slightly too casual mention of someone flying in to help. Could Simonov know about the rescue team? And there were other things. A couple of times, Scotch had caught himself noticing that. Simonov moved like someone who knew the jungle, really knew it. Like the time he pointed out fresh Dracath tracks, then silently nodded toward a palmodendron with claw marks on the bark. Or when they were choosing a campsite. Scotch hadn't even mentioned it yet, but Simonov had already grabbed his backpack and started moving away from the antelope trail. Let's head back, Scotch grumbled, avoiding eye contact. He didn't want to stir anything up just yet, especially since Simonov had been helpful, not a burden. Quite the opposite, Scotch gently closed the depot door, catching a sideways glance from Simonov, part sympathy, part sarcasm, as if to say, you might want to fix that, Chief. But, of course, Simonov didn't say anything aloud. To be honest, Scotch admitted quietly, speaking to Zuberbuller for some reason. There have been a couple cases of depots being emptied. But not like this. One time, the lock battery died, and the coon cats went wild. Wrecked everything.